guys, tonight we're heading somewhere a little absurd, a little majestic, and entirely overgroomed. You're standing in the fragrant heart of a Mughal courtyard, where rosewater drips from carved fountains. Peacocks strut like they own the place. And somewhere nearby, a man is being yelled at for having uneven mustache tips. The year is... oh, sometime in the 16th century, give or take a nose ring. And you're about to be judged by the curl of your facial hair. Or the lack of it. Because tonight, the mustache is not optional. It is divine. It is policy. It is a matter of honor, of masculinity, of suspiciously symmetrical grooming routines. You've just wandered into a time and place where your upper lip could determine your career, your rank, or whether someone throws a mango at your head. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening from somewhere quiet, or somewhere weird, drop your location and local time in the comments. I always love seeing where you're tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge into the capital city of the Mughal Empire. Let's call it Agra, because it is Agra, and because it's dusty, echoing with camel belches, and thick with incense that can't quite mask the smell of street kebabs and ambition. You've somehow, don't ask how, landed an invitation to the imperial court of Emperor Akbar. You know, that Akbar, the one who conquered half of the subcontinent before his voice even finished breaking. He's progressive, deeply philosophical, and terrifyingly obsessed with things being just so, including mustaches. You stand outside the Diwani Khas, the hall of private audiences, watching courtiers glide past. Some are military men with swords and horse sweat lingering in their scarves. Others are scholars, poets, and yes, mustache stylists. Actual professionals whose only job is to ensure that the curvature of the emperor's upper lip whiskers resembles a symmetrical, divine crescent at all times. It's whispered, softly, reverently, that a courtier once arrived with a lopsided mustache. Within moments, he was banished to Bengal. Bengal. That's like being sent from Versailles to a swamp with excellent rice dishes. No one even asked his name. Just swoosh, exiled on grounds of follicular treason. The Imperial Guards eye your face. They're not looking for weapons. They're looking for mustache etiquette. Yours is... well, let's just say the dust isn't helping. You try to feign confidence, turning your face slightly so the stronger side shows. Classic beginner's mistake. They notice. Of course they do. Inside, it's quieter. Cool marble. Echoes of slippers on stone. And at the far end of the chamber sits Akbar himself, on a cushion that probably cost more than a small palace. His mustache, immaculate, gently arched, the tips curling toward the heavens like they're consulting a higher authority. You can't look directly at it. You might go blind from the sheer symmetry. Your mustache, he says, slowly, his voice like sandalwood and judgment, is from the north, perhaps. You nod, not trusting your voice. He means it as an insult. Northern styles were rumored to favor bulk over balance, quantity over grace, the mustache equivalent of wearing Crocs to a wedding. Still, he waves a hand. You are permitted to remain. Welcome to the Mughal Empire, where beards are fine, sure, but the mustache is divine architecture, a badge of breeding, a cultural compass, curved like the blades of the Empire's most expensive daggers. Historians still argue whether the Emperor's obsession with mustaches was a genuine spiritual philosophy, or just a competitive sport among courtiers desperate to get noticed. There's even a fringe theory involving Sufi mysticism and the sacred geometry of hair. But let's not tug that thread too hard. It's already fraying. You move through the crowd, now hyper-aware of every face. You notice patterns. Soldiers. Thick handlebars, waxed with what smells like sesame and arrogance. Poets? Thin, elegant strokes, more calligraphy than facial hair. Diplomats from Persia? Oh, they have the twisty ends, like tiny cinnamon rolls of intimidation. The mustache is a signature. It says what you believe, who you serve, how much mango chutney you can eat without flinching. Some whisper that a man once disguised himself by shaving one side of his mustache. He walked in circles for hours, only turning his right cheek to those he passed. He got away with it until a parrot spotted the fraud and screeched, "Crooked lip!" Parrots were surprisingly popular snitches in Mughal court drama. Never trust a bird in a turban. There's also the tale of a barber who angered his noble client by trimming an extra millimeter from one end. 1 millimeter. The client wept for 3 days, then commissioned a poem about loss and imbalance, which is now taught in 4 elite academies. And through it all, Akbar sits on his throne, as still as a portrait, his mustache motionless even when he speaks, likely the result of trained facial restraint. Some say he had a method involving string, beeswax, and absolute silence during application. You're starting to sweat. Your upper lip itches. You wonder if they can tell. They can. But for now, you've survived. Barely. You're still in the hall of private audiences, still blinking from the near smiting your asymmetrical mustache narrowly avoided. The room smells faintly of jasmine oil, roasted cardamom, and something vaguely resembling disciplined fear. And now, as you follow the drifting sandalwood smoke to a smaller adjoining chamber, you find yourself somewhere even stranger, the Imperial grooming room. You were not invited, but no one stops you, which in Mughal court terms is basically permission. The grooming chamber is quiet, reverent, the kind of place where even the mirrors look nervous. You step inside and immediately, your ears are filled with a curious sound, like the synchronized whispers of a dozen cloths being wrung in slow motion. There, on a carved teakwood dais, sits Emperor Akbar again. Different outfit, same mustache. And surrounding him are no fewer than 14 attendants, barbers, oilers, fanners, mustache whisperers, each playing a role in the daily ritual of facial harmony. The Emperor does not speak. He merely nods once, slowly, and the ritual begins. One man lifts a bowl of water, rose water and saffron from the smell of it. He tips it gently onto a linen cloth, which another man folds and dabs against the Emperor's upper lip with the precision of a calligrapher dotting an I. Another lifts a tiny vial of oil, clove and almond, historians think, though one rogue diary suggests it was laced with powdered pearl, possibly for glow, possibly for tax evasion. Hard to say. Then comes the waxing. 2 attendants, standing in perfectly mirrored positions, dip 2 fingers each into a soft, golden paste. They hold their breath. You hold yours. And with the careful symmetry of a lunar eclipse, they apply the wax in upward strokes, never side to side. Side strokes, apparently, were considered vulgar, or French. Akbar still hasn't moved, not even a twitch. You learn, by overhearing a few whispered exchanges, that this daily ritual takes 90 minutes, not including drying time. The Emperor's facial hair must dry naturally under a pearl-encrusted fan waved by someone with excellent triceps and no hope of promotion. Historians still argue whether this elaborate process was about vanity or statecraft. Because here's the thing. For Akbar, appearance wasn't just decoration. It was diplomacy. A perfectly balanced mustache communicated discipline, symmetry, cosmic order. A ruler whose lip was aligned could surely align an empire. One court historian, who may have been drunk on fig wine, claimed that the left curl of Akbar's mustache once predicted monsoon patterns. He was fired, but only after he grew a full beard in protest and started a short-lived weather cult. You tiptoe closer. On a nearby shelf lies a collection of tools: ivory-handled combs, miniature scissors, tiny measuring sticks engraved in Persian. There's even a golden thread stretched across 2 pegs, presumably used to check symmetry like some kind of architectural blueprint. You suspect it might also double as an execution tool. Just a hunch. A barber notices you. His eyes narrow. "Visitor," he says softly. "Your follicles seem unsynchronized." You want to lie. You really do. But your mouth goes dry, and you blurt out, "Humidity." A pause. Then, miraculously, he nods. "The 5th enemy of balance," he murmurs, turning back to his task. You inch toward a low table nearby, pretending to examine a tray of oils. You spot one labeled Zardgulab Irumi, probably Turkish rose essence. Another reads Singhi Tel, an oil made from horn shavings, used to encourage boldness. Allegedly. The label has a warning. For external use only. That's somehow not reassuring. And there, at the center of it all, is Akbar's mirror. It's huge. Oval. Polished obsidian ringed with emeralds and inscriptions about patience, grace, and proper hair angles. It's said that this mirror once belonged to Alexander the Great. More likely, it belonged to a merchant with an excellent backstory. Akbar finally moves. Just one eye. He looks at his reflection. A breathless pause. The attendants freeze. And then, the smallest nod. The left curl is deemed acceptable. Somewhere in the distance, a sitar plays, possibly in relief. You remain still, hoping not to be noticed. But you've already seen too much. You've seen the ruler of an empire trust his face to 14 men with wax and trembling hands. You've seen a room where facial symmetry is treated like a holy equation. You've seen a mustache that might, in some deeply mystical sense, be holding the Mughal world together. And you've also seen your own reflection in a brass bowl and realized, with a slow sigh, that your own mustache is aspirational at best. One barber taps a gong. The session is over. The Emperor stands. His movements are fluid, not a single whisker disturbed. The attendants step back like synchronized crabs, heads bowed. Akbar walks past you without a glance. But as he leaves the chamber, you think, just for a second, that the tips of his mustache flutter slightly, like 2 birds nodding in agreement. You blink. Did that just happen? Probably not. But in this empire, reality has rules. And one of them is this. The mustache must be perfect. You emerge from the Emperor's grooming chamber dazed, slightly blinded by the reflected perfection of his upper lip, and carrying the faint scent of sandalwood on your tunic. Outside, the court thrums with life. Courtiers glide past you like silken ghosts, some whispering about grain taxes, others debating poetry, but all sporting some kind of highly intentional facial adornment. It doesn't take long before you notice a pattern. No 2 mustaches are quite the same, but none are accidental either. Each one is styled, angled, scented, and maintained like a prized falcon. There's a code here, a language you haven't yet learned, but you're about to. You follow a group of young nobles toward the garden, and one of them, let's call him Arif, because that's the name he insists you use despite never introducing himself, begins explaining the rules. See that man? He nods toward a stern figure in a crimson turban. Military, left heavy whiskers, means he's a cavalry officer. You squint. The mustache is thicker on the left. It droops slightly, like it's tired of running up hills on horseback. And that one, Arif gestures toward a man with an upright, combed, vertical style, is an accountant. Numbers man. They always wax straight up. Symbol of upward mobility. You stifle a snort. That's real? Arif turns to you with the kind of seriousness usually reserved for funerals. This is not Paris. This is the Mughal court. Here, the shape of your mustache is your resume. It turns out he's not exaggerating. The Empire didn't just tolerate mustache styles, it legislated them. Each rank of the court had its own approved curvature, length, and width. Deviating from it without permission, a punishable offense, sometimes fined, sometimes demoted, occasionally relocated to a province with more goats than people. There was even a manual, lost now of course, burned during one of the smaller palace fires, or possibly eaten by an angry elephant. But fragments remain, and they tell us fascinating things. For instance, the Royal Crescent style was reserved for men in the Emperor's direct service. Curved upward at both ends, tips pointing toward the ears. Worn with pride, or unbearable smugness. The falcon's hook, slightly curled at one end and straight at the other, was for border patrol officers, symbolizing unpredictability and courage, and slightly poor balance. Scholars, Arif continues, wear what we call the dust quill, thin, barely visible, like a faded line of ink. You spot one such man near a jasmine bush. His mustache is so faint it could be a shadow. You wonder if he uses actual ink to darken it, or just sheer academic willpower. Historians still argue whether these styles emerged organically, or whether they were dictated by imperial decree. A few scholars insist there was a mustache vizier, an appointed official who audited lip hair and issued formal approvals. Sadly, there's no concrete proof, just one suspicious miniature painting of a man holding both a quill and a razor, standing beside a chart labeled Lip Proportions, Northern versus Southern. What's certain is this: your facial hair said who you were, not just socially, but spiritually. Some mystics believed your mustache should follow the arc of your soul. Others believed the left curl held your ambitions, while the right one stored your secrets. One barber claimed to have read a man's fate by sniffing his mustache oil. He said the man would be eaten by geese. That barber was later trampled by geese. You do the math. The pressure was immense. Young men spent hours staring into copper mirrors, agonizing over angles. Fathers passed down tips like family heirlooms. Entire lineages were known for a specific style. The House of Timur, for instance, had the same narrow-swept taper for 6 generations. Until one cousin tried a square-end chop and was disowned mid-feast. You sit with Arif beneath a neem tree as he pulls out a tiny silver case. Inside are 3 combs, a small jar of clove oil, and what looks like a sculpting wire. You never know, he says casually, when you'll need to reset your ends. You try not to gape. There's a pause. Then Arif leans closer, lowers his voice. Between us, he whispers, I heard that Prince Salim's left curl touches his cheekbone. You blink. That's forbidden. He nods gravely. His father doesn't know. Yet. That's how serious this all is. One misplaced curl could mean dishonor, a patchy spot, social exile, a badly timed trim. That's how wars start. Okay, maybe not wars, but very stern poetry recitals. At one point, a gong rings faintly in the distance. It's time for the afternoon audience. The nobles rise. Arif adjusts his mustache with a single upward pinch and strides away like a man who knows his angles are correct. You remain behind, reflecting on what you've learned. This empire may be built on conquest and philosophy, art and trade. But somewhere, just under the surface, it's also held together by one tiny, ridiculous truth. Everyone here is one grooming mishap away from disaster. By now, your understanding of Mughal power has undergone a subtle shift. You thought it all came down to armies, taxes, and the occasional dazzlingly large diamond. But no, The true machinery of imperial control runs on something much slipperier, something golden, something that smells faintly of clove, musk, and ambition. You're beginning to suspect the Mughal Empire may have risen on the strength of its mustache oils. You drift into a different part of the palace complex now, drawn by a haze of fragrant steam and the soft clink of brass instruments. The air is heavy with sandalwood and rose. You've stumbled into the perfumer's quarters, or more precisely, into the sacred sanctum of the imperial barbers. And they're not just cutting hair. Oh no, they're alchemists, therapists, stylists, possibly part-time assassins, depending on how the day goes. One of them, an older man with a beard that clearly says, "I could have been a scholar, but I chose a nobler path," waves you over with the same hand he's using to mix something that resembles molten gold. He's blending saffron wax, a concoction of saffron, beeswax, and walnut oil that glistens like sunrise and smells like royalty. "This batch," he murmurs, "is for the Grand Vizier. His right curl's been drooping since monsoon season." He says this like a doctor reporting a terminal illness. Beside him, a younger barber grinds something in a tiny marble bowl. You peer in. It's turmeric, clove, and... wait, is that powdered oyster shell? "It helps with stiffness," the boy explains. "And the shine. Some men like the phoenix gleam." You nod slowly. You do not know what the phoenix gleam is. You will not ask. You are not ready. Historians still debate what ingredients were truly used in Mughal mustache products. Contemporary accounts list everything from rose extract and goat milk to crushed pearls, burnt almond skin, and even saffron-infused yak butter. Some of this may be exaggerated. Some of it may have been marketing. But what's clear is this. The Mughal elite didn't just apply oils. They worshipped them. Each oil had a purpose, a message. Bergamot oil for charisma, camphor oil for clarity, frankincense for solemnity, often used by judges or men about to deliver bad news. There's even an account of a general who refused to march into battle until his mustache had been treated with blue lotus extract for inner peace. He was known for winning with unusually low casualties and possibly humming mid-sword fight. You spot a tray of labeled bottles nearby. One is engraved in Arabic, one in Persian, one in Sanskrit. Multilingual mustache maintenance. The Empire's cultural blend in a single mirrored box. Another label catches your eye. Koi Daftar. You ask the barber what it means. He grins. "It's a joke. A blend of oils meant to make you look like you know what you're doing. A leadership scent. Imperial imposter syndrome, bottled and spiced." You watch as another barber heats a spoonful of wax over a lamp flame. The room flickers golden. He applies it to a noble's mustache, combing it outward with short, reverent strokes. The noble never speaks, just tilts his head slightly, like a sundial waiting for the right angle. You start to realize this is more than grooming. This is ritual. A prayer of touch and texture, repeated daily across the Empire's ruling class. And the barbers, they aren't servants, they're gatekeepers. It's said that Akbar himself selected his personal mustache oil blender by testing over 300 samples blindfolded. The winner? A quiet man from Kashmir who wept during his final round, not from stress, but because he believed the scent he'd made was too beautiful to be smelled by mortals. He was hired on the spot, and immediately given a palace wing with 10 goats and his own garden. One fringe theory, found in a Persian manuscript that scholars only take half seriously, claims that the Empire had a secret department, the Itra-i-Royal, or Scent Office. This shadowy team of scent masters allegedly crafted strategic blends to influence court mood, diplomatic meetings, even marriage proposals. A few spices here, a A few drops of citrus there. One curl more fragrant than the other. Suddenly you're married, or invaded. The same manuscript mentions battle wax, a pungent mixture meant to intimidate. It included garlic, crushed ants, and panic. Probably apocryphal. Hopefully. Back in the chamber, a dispute is brewing. Two nobles have brought competing oil blends for the Emperor's evening appointment. Both claim superiority. Both have testimonials. One even has a poet prepared to recite an ode to viscosity. The head barber sniffs each blend, raises one eyebrow, then picks a third oil entirely. Both nobles nod respectfully. You nod too, just in case. You leave the room soon after, nose slightly overwhelmed, skin tingling from a stray splash of something spicy. As you walk back through the courtyard, the breeze carries the mingled scents of dozens of upper lips. It's dizzying. You lean against a wall and wonder, if power has a smell, is it sandalwood, or saffron, or something subtler, like the quiet confidence of a man whose mustache never droops, even during a thunderstorm. Either way, one thing is clear. The Mughal Empire didn't rise on brute force alone. It rose, in part, on a shimmering tide of waxes, oils, and the unshakable belief that a man's soul begins at the root of his mustache. You wake, if one can wake, inside a dream this deep, to the unmistakable sound of elephants, distant, groaning like furniture being moved in the heavens. Somewhere nearby, a peacock screams at a bush, and down in the lower courtyard, something remarkable is happening. A barber is being paid, not with coins, not with jewels, but with an elephant. You blink. The scene unfolds casually, like this happens every Tuesday. A courtier, dressed in muted silks, and a mustache as sharp as a crescent dagger, bows and gestures toward a handler. The handler leads forward an adolescent elephant wearing a velvet saddlecloth embroidered with tiny gold mustaches. The barber, who might just be the calmest man alive, nods once, accepts the reins, and climbs up like this is perfectly normal. Because it is. In the Mughal Empire, barbers, especially those who tended to imperial upper lips, were not mere tradesmen. They were, in some cases, exalted above scholars, musicians, even minor royalty. And they were paid accordingly. Historians still argue whether the payment in elephant system was symbolic or practical. Some say it was a mark of imperial favor. You've tamed my mustache, now tame this creature of heaven. Others suggest it was logistical. Elephants could carry wax supplies, oils, or even serve as traveling grooming salons. A luxury spa on 4 thunderous legs. You descend into the courtyard for a closer look. The elephant snorts gently, and the barber pats its ear like it's a puppy. The courtier beams. His mustache has just been trimmed into what you now recognize as the Timur line, a narrow downward stroke known for suggesting both literacy and deep inner melancholy. Another barber passes you, wheeling a cart filled with tiny glass vials. You pause him. Did you see that elephant exchange? He shrugs. Last week, a man got a camel. The week before, 20 ducks. You blink again. The Mughal system of barber compensation was, to put it gently, chaotic. Some were paid in spices, others in silks, land, or invitations to secret poetry nights hosted by nobles who took their mustache metaphors very seriously. There's one recorded instance of a barber being granted a small village after restoring the symmetry of a governor's whiskers following a tragic turban fire. The village was named Mughal, loosely translating to upper lip place. But elephants were special. Only the top barbers, the ones who had shaped the imperial mustache itself, received such gifts. Their names were whispered like spells. Their scissors were said to be forged from meteoric iron, cooled in sacred snow, and sharpened only on stones blessed by monks. Okay, that part may be exaggerated, but the reverence, very real. You overhear an elderly scribe reciting names: Hassan the Delicate Hand, Umar the Left Curl Master, Fatima of the Silken Blade. Wait, Fatima? Yes. There were female barbers, though rare. Some served behind veils in the royal harem, responsible for maintaining the poetic facial balance of noble women, and, in a few legendary cases, disguising male courtiers for secret missions using powdered charcoal and eyebrow string. One fringe chronicle even claims that during a political crisis, a female master groomer was summoned to trim Akbar's mustache in absolute silence. Her hands never shook. Her lines were perfect. She was offered land, horses, and an entire river in thanks. She declined. All she wanted was a scroll of ancient poetry and a tin of jasmine wax. You wonder if she got the elephant too. Down by the elephant pen, a younger barber in training sits sketching designs into the dirt. You peek over his shoulder. The drawings are labeled: tapered dagger, crocodile grin, rain catcher, the merchant's lie. You point. That one. Merchant's lie. He grins. Looks honest, isn't? Worn by tax collectors. It's said that every mustache style had a purpose, and some were so convincing they could settle arguments without a single word. The crocodile grin, used during treaty negotiations, gave the impression of amused threat. The rain catcher, preferred by agricultural ministers, implied readiness, or possibly just sadness about monsoons. But only the greatest designs, the ones worthy of an elephant, came with stories. Legends, like the tale of the barber who used a single strand of tiger fur to curl the emperor's tips into mirrored spirals. Or the wax blender who accidentally invented a formula so glossy it blinded a rival mid-conversation. Or the man who trimmed a prince's mustache so precisely it reportedly echoed when he laughed. You sit beneath a neem tree, watching the newly paid barber ride his elephant away. The animal moves with sleepy grandeur, leaving behind a faint trail of crushed mint and respect. And it dawns on you, here in this empire, the upper lip is sacred ground. And those who touch it, shape it, coax it into symmetrical serenity. They're more than stylists. They're stewards of dignity, alchemists of balance, and, when the moment is right, elephant whisperers. By this point, you've absorbed enough about Mughal facial hair politics to know one thing with certainty. You are woefully unqualified to grow a court-approved mustache. Which is unfortunate, because outside the palace walls, the pressure is somehow worse. You wander into the market districts of Agra, where the Empire's commoners live, love and, yes, also obsess over their facial follicles. And while the marble courtyards of the nobility echo with the click of golden scissors and the swish of silk grooming cloths, here it's all rough wool, brass mirrors, and shame. A young man sits on a stoop, furiously rubbing his upper lip with mustard oil, while muttering what you can only assume are desperate prayers to the follicle gods. Another lad passes you with a strange device strapped to his face. It looks like 2 spoons, a cork, and some twine. You ask. It's a growth aligner. Homemade. Based on a dream he once had. Welcome to the world of peasant peach fuzz problems. A grim, oil-stained struggle against biology and imperial expectations. See, the Mughal mustache obsession wasn't limited to elites. Like all imperial fashions, it trickled down, slowly, unevenly, and unfairly. If a noble's mustache said, "I command armies," then a farmer's mustache was forced to say, "Please don't accuse me of disrespecting the Empire. I'm just trying to grow something." Anything, really. You stroll past a cloth merchant's stall and hear 2 men arguing. "Your right curl touches your nostril," one hisses. It's a seasonal imbalance, the other snaps. It turns out facial hair could get a man in trouble. Serious trouble. There are court records, actual, real ones, of lower-class men being fined for imitating noble styles. One shoemaker reportedly spent a night in jail for attempting a handlebar curl while not being of appropriate rank. Historians still debate whether this was centrally enforced or simply a local power trip by petty officials with sharp eyes and questionable priorities. One obscure village scroll references something called the Lip Line Registry, allegedly kept by local governors. No copies have survived, possibly eaten by goats, or burned in shame. You pass a stall selling grooming supplies, small combs, tin pots of something labeled whisker balm, now with camel tallow, and a handmade chart titled Choose Your Curl, Know Your Place. There are 12 styles listed. The top 4 are scratched out with the note, Forbidden unto the common nose. The bottom 4 have names like the Unwashed Swoop and the Pity Spiral. A boy stands in front of it, studying it like scripture. He's maybe 15. The faintest dusting of hair clings to his lip like anxious moss. You can practically hear his soul whispering, just one follicle, just one. A barber in this part of town makes 1 copper per trim, but he does steady business, because here, a half-decent mustache is a ticket to opportunity. A good one might mean a shot at the palace, or at least a job guarding someone else's camel. Of course, the poor have their own hacks. Boiled tamarind paste, rumored to wake the lip, smoked beetle leaf compresses. Ritual chants. One man insists that staring into a river at sunrise for 7 days will stimulate growth. He also claims to have seen a mermaid with a beard, so take it with salt. A fringe belief circulates among peasants that noble mustaches grow not from bloodlines, but from diet. The theory: rich people eat more almonds. Almonds make hair grow. Therefore, almonds, aristocracy. This logic has led to at least 3 almond thefts per week in your neighborhood. One baker caught stuffing almond paste under his nose nightly. It did not help. You duck into a tea house to rest. Inside, a wrinkled man with a magnificently crooked mustache nods at you. He's old, weathered, and clearly past caring about imperial standards. You look worried. He rasps, sipping his chai. Upper lip trauma. You nod. He chuckles. Back in my day, all we had was goat butter and prayers. Now these boys want to sparkle. He's not wrong. Fashion has accelerated. Pressure has intensified. Everyone's chasing the noble look, and none of them can quite reach it. You ask him if he ever tried to mimic the Emperor's style. He leans in. I once twisted my mustache so high it touched my eyebrows. You raise yours. He smiles. Didn't work. I fainted from the effort. The room laughs gently, not unkindly. And in that moment, you realize this is where the heart of Mughal mustache culture really lives. Not in the marble halls, but here, in the tea shops, the alleyway mirrors, the hopeful oils mixed in clay pots and labeled with shaky optimism. The noblemen may have defined the ideal, but the people, they made it a dream that hurt, burned a little, smelled weird, but endured nonetheless, because no empire ever ruled alone. Sometimes it rides on the shoulders of peach-fuzzed boys, rubbing garlic paste onto their faces, believing, truly believing, that symmetry is destiny. You've wandered through courtyards and barber stalls, ducked the judgment of symmetry zealots, and witnessed commoners risking garlic burns for a better tomorrow. You're feeling wiser, warier, slightly more moisturized. But just as you begin to think you've seen the full, absurd range of Mughal mustache culture, bam! The sky opens, the stars realign, and someone casually drops the phrase, "Your mustache is in retrograde." You stop mid-step. Excuse me? Welcome to Mughal Mustache astrology, where facial hair meets fate, and your upper lip might just be a celestial satellite. A noblewoman passing by glances at you, then at the faint hairs on your lip, and offers the kind of pity usually reserved for people who sneeze into soup. Venus must be in decline, she murmurs, walking on. What follows is a dive into a world where waxing your mustache isn't just cosmetic, it's cosmic. You find yourself in a tiled pavilion by the river, seated among scholars who use the stars to determine grooming schedules. One of them, a spectacled man with a mustache shaped like a falcon wing, welcomes you with a nod. You've come for your lip chart? You glance around. There are charts, diagrams, bowls of pistachios, and an armillary sphere with tiny mustaches affixed to its rings. You nod, hesitantly. He pulls out parchment. Date of birth. You give him something vague. Time of first facial hair appearance? I was 13, maybe. He hums. Tragic. Mercury was dominant that week. Apparently, the position of the planets at your time of first growth affects everything, from the curl strength of your left tip to how well wax adheres on humid days. Historians still argue whether this mustache astrology was taken seriously or was just an elaborate prank by bored astrologers who ran out of marriage predictions. But in several texts, especially those from Akbar's court, we find references to auspicious grooming days, celestial follicle alignments, and one poem that reads, "O Mars, do not scorch my whiskers' root, let love wax long beneath thine eye." You try not to laugh, but part of you is genuinely intrigued. There are 12 known mustache houses in this celestial system, each linked to an emotion, a fate, and a favored style. House of the Serpent, sudden risky trims. House of the Lotus, waxes that smell too good for your own good. House of the Crooked Star, notorious for left-leaning growth. House of the Empty Lip, self-explanatory, deeply tragic. A woman across the circle pulls out a scroll and gasps. "I'm in the season of the trembling whisker," she cries. Two other astrologers nod solemnly and begin passing her a tray of calming teas. It turns out the Emperor's own grooming schedule was often aligned with these cycles. One document suggests Akbar once delayed a military campaign by 3 days because Jupiter had entered the realm of patchiness. Another claims he wore a temporary mustache pendant, like a golden fake mustache, during an eclipse, just in case the gods were watching. You glance at your own chart. The astrologer points to a tiny curl-shaped constellation. "Ah," he says gravely. "You were born under the split strand." You wait. "It means," he says, lowering his voice, "you are destined to inspire others, while always doubting your own alignment." You blink. That's eerily accurate. Another astrologer leans in. "We recommend cedarwood oil during waning moons. Also, avoid trimming on Thursdays." You nod like you understand. It's unclear how widespread this celestial grooming culture was, but among the elite, especially poets, artists, and particularly superstitious noblemen, it was practically doctrine. Wax makers inscribed zodiac glyphs onto their jars. Some astrologers offered grooming horoscopes. This week, the stars urge restraint. Let your left curl rest. One fringe text describes a secret society, the Order of the 12th Whisker, whose members followed a sacred calendar for grooming. They met only on solstice mornings, applied oil in silence, and supposedly read fortunes in stray trimmings. You ask if that's true. The astrologer shrugs. Everything is true when Mercury's in reverse. As the sun dips, the scholars roll up their charts and begin lighting candles. The air smells of sandalwood, ink, and ambition. One man tunes a sitar. Another smooths his own tips with thumb and forefinger, glancing upward as if seeking permission from the moon. You walk away, head spinning. Somehow it all makes sense now. In a world so vast, so uncertain, where empires rise and rivers flood, and elephants sometimes wander into kitchens, it helps to believe your mustache has a destiny. That it's not just hair, it's a compass, a calendar, a prayer. So you look up at the stars, and you wonder, is the moon tugging your right curl? Is Saturn making your wax flaky? And will tomorrow finally be the day the left side matches? The stars have spoken, your whiskers have been red, and you're quietly adjusting your expectations now that you're apparently cosmically doomed to uneven tips forever. But fate, as it turns out, is not content to let you simply ponder. No. Because now, just as you're sipping a modest fig sherbet by a fountain, someone yells the words you least expect to hear in a peaceful, moonlit Mughal garden. Your mustache curls to the left. Silence falls. Gasps ripple across the courtyard. Someone drops a mango. And in the next breath, you realize what you've accidentally walked into. The left curl rebellion. Okay, fine. It's not exactly a rebellion in the traditional sense. No barricades, no muskets. But make no mistake, this was an uprising. A mustache-based insurrection against the tyranny of enforced symmetry. Let's back up. As you may recall, the Mughal aesthetic demanded balance, harmony. The ideal mustache was as symmetrical as a palace arch and as deliberate as imperial calligraphy. But not everyone agreed with this. Some believed natural curls, those that leaned left, right, or heaven forbid, drooped, deserved dignity too. And so, somewhere in the quieter gardens of the court, a faction began to form. Their motto? Let it curl. It began with small gestures. A noble here, a scribe there. They wore their mustaches intentionally unbalanced. One tip long, the other short. Some curled up on just one side. Others let the left side droop freely like a sleepy vine. Naturally, the court was scandalized. There were accusations, poetry, counter-poetry. A brief spate of public duels, though instead of swords, participants smacked each other with long mustache combs. Historians still argue whether this was truly political or just an aesthetic tantrum born of laziness. Some say it started as a joke, an artist protesting a cancelled commission. Others insist the left curl movement had philosophical roots, a belief that true beauty lay in imperfection. There's even a fringe theory that suggests it was started by a prince whose mustache couldn't curl right, no matter how many astrologers he bribed. Out of frustration, he made asymmetry fashionable. You're now standing among the movement's remnants, mostly younger nobles, poets, and one older man with a tiny monocle who's clearly seen some things. A debate is underway. The left curl, one man declares, gesturing dramatically with his teacup, is the soul's natural descent. To force it upward is to lie. Another shouts, then why not shave it all and embrace chaos? Everyone gasps. He is escorted out. You're handed a scroll titled The Curl Manifesto. It's beautifully illustrated. It argues for a liberation of follicles, a decentralization of grooming hierarchies, and a future where the left droops freely under the eye of a forgiving sun. A woman in silver robes leans over and whispers, "We were almost exiled for publishing that." You try to sip your sherbet quietly, but it's difficult with everyone loudly debating metaphors about rivers, balance, and goats. There's one recorded moment from this movement that passed into Mughal legend. During a royal banquet, a left curl sympathizer allegedly entered wearing a grand embroidered robe and a perfectly centered mustache. He waited until dessert. Then, slowly, deliberately, he dipped his left tip into his soup. A collective gasp echoed across the hall. The emperor, stone-faced, continued eating. But for weeks afterward, noblemen began showing up to court with subtle soup stains on their mustaches. A quiet show of solidarity. It was called the Spoon Revolt. Naturally, the movement was eventually reabsorbed into the mainstream. As these things go, the left curl style was co-opted, formalized, and turned into an approved eccentricity. If you were sufficiently poetic or wealthy, you could apply for a waiver of curl symmetry. Only 3 were granted per year. One was awarded to a man who built a mirrored palace just so his mustache would appear symmetrical from the inside. The rebellion faded, but its spirit lingered. Today, in dusty Mughal records, you'll find sketches of mustaches with small annotations. Asymmetrical by intent, or left droop, do not adjust. And in some surviving portraits, look closely, you'll spot a curl leaning lazily toward one ear, almost as if it knows the rules. Back in the garden, someone hands you a small tin of wax. You open it. Inside is a note. Let it curl. You stare at your reflection in a silver tray. Your mustache is, indeed, listing slightly to port. And for the first time since arriving in this empire of mirrored precision, you feel peaceful. Maybe symmetry isn't everything. Maybe there's grace in the lopsided, honor in the flawed, poetry in the tip that dips ever so slightly into your fig sherbet. So you lift your chin, and you let it curl. The garden still hums behind you, a place of rebellion and sideways whiskers, but you've drifted onward, drawn by a new sound. Smack, a hush, smack, another gasp. You're in a colonnaded courtyard now, its tiled floor polished to a shine, and the tension in the air is complicated. Regal, but ridiculous. Half duel, half dance. And what you're watching is what might be the most awkward competition ever created. Mustache dueling. Yes, it was a thing. No, it didn't involve swords, or fists, or anything remotely practical. What you're witnessing is 2 grown men, resplendently dressed, arms folded behind their backs, aggressively slapping each other's mustaches with controlled flicks of their heads. It looks like a mixture of peacock mating rituals and very polite headbanging. You whisper to the man beside you, "Are they mad?" He shakes his head, eyes glued to the match. No, they are settling an insult. Apparently, in the refined absurdity of Mughal elite life, there existed a custom called the Whisker War, a non-lethal, honor-based confrontation meant to resolve slights too petty for swords, but too serious for silence. The rules were precise. Only the mustaches could touch. No hands, no other body part. Slapping, flicking, brushing, or full contact twirling was permitted, but only above the upper lip. The duel would begin with a bow. Then, alternating turns, each man would step forward and deliver a whisker strike to the opponent. A good hit produced a satisfying thwap, ideally loud enough to attract commentary from the judges, who often sat sipping tamarind tea and grading style, not force. If one man's mustache came uncurled or lost form, he forfeited. If both stayed intact after 7 rounds, it was a draw, and each had to compose a poem praising the other's facial resilience. You stand in stunned silence as one combatant lands a flawless diagonal flick, knocking a bead of oil from the other's left tip. The crowd oohs. Historians still argue, whispers your neighbor, whether this began as satire or a genuine martial art. You nod slowly. I believe it is both. The practice, while not widespread, was especially popular among poets, scholars, and those too frail for wrestling, but too proud for passive aggression. One diary tells of a philosopher who dueled 14 times in 1 month, eventually developing a technique called the windmill of shame. Another record details a failed diplomatic envoy whose insult was so grievous, He was challenged to a triple duel, morning, midday, and after supper. He lost all three. His mustache was shaved as punishment and buried in the embassy garden. There's even a fringe theory that Akbar himself once took part in a ceremonial mustache duel, blindfolded. Supposedly, he defeated a rival in 2 strokes and recited a haiku before leaving the courtyard. Historians mostly dismiss this, but a small statue in an outlying village depicts what appears to be a blindfolded man head-flicking a goat. So, who's to say? Back in the courtyard, the match concludes. One man's mustache has flopped into a sad crescent. The victor bows deeply. The judge, straight-faced, hands him a silk ribbon embroidered with a single word: firm. The loser sighs, produces a tiny ink brush, and begins composing a praise verse on his opponent's sandal. You wander away from the arena, still blinking at what you've seen. But it makes a strange sort of sense. In a world where words held weight and silence could insult, the mustache became more than symbol. It became weapon. Shield. Message. Your neighbor catches up to you, now smiling. I once challenged a man, he says. He said my wax smelled of vinegar. You wait. I lost, he adds, sighing. But I gained a wife. She liked the way my left tip bounced. You nod, as one does when life takes strange turns. Not far from here, in a shaded cloister, is a quiet little library. You step inside, welcomed by the scent of papyrus and cloves. On a dusty shelf, you find a scroll, Techniques of Whisker War, Volume 3, The Gentle Arts. You open it. A quote on the first page. Strike with grace, curl with pride. Never underestimate a man whose mustache does not flinch. You roll the scroll closed. There's no escaping it now. The mustache is more than fashion. It's a language, a duel, a destiny. A way to channel honor in a world full of impossible expectations and hot soup. And when words fail, sometimes all that's left is to flick and bow. The memory of the whisker duel lingers with you like the sting of aftershave. Sharp, absurd, strangely noble. You wander deeper into the palace compound, where the afternoon sun throws long shadows and your shoes make soft whispers across the stone floor. That's when you notice a small wooden sign hanging above a doorway. Shaving strictly forbidden on Wednesdays. You stare. Surely that's a joke. You step inside. It is not a joke. Welcome to the peculiar grooming taboos of the Mughal Empire, where personal hygiene was not just a matter of timing, but timing dictated by the heavens, the court, and a strong dose of inherited superstition. The room you've entered is a barber's registry. A long desk, shelves of scrolls, a list of names and appointment times. But beside each entry is a note. No trimming today, moon in conflict. Left side only until Friday. Avoid oils. Too windy. You glance at a small chalkboard near the entrance. Today is Wednesday. A barber sighs and leans over. If you need shaving, he murmurs, come back tomorrow. We do not risk it today. You nod, even though you don't understand. Yet, turns out Wednesday was widely avoided for shaving. Not just in Mughal lands, but across several parts of the Islamic world, South Asia, and beyond. The reasons varied: astrological, religious, or rooted in ancient health lore. Some believed that shaving on a Wednesday weakened your inner fire. Others claimed it angered certain celestial alignments, leading to poor luck, failed crops, or, worse, split ends. One court physician even wrote a short treatise linking Wednesday shaving to troubles of the bowels and quarrels in marriage. That scroll was quietly buried in the palace garden. You meet a junior barber who tells you in whispers, there's a story, maybe true, of a prince who trimmed his beard on a Wednesday, and the next day, his horse threw him into a melon cart. He pauses. The horse was never the same. Historians still argue whether these taboos were enforced empire-wide or varied by region and superstition. In some places, the rules were stricter. In others, they were whispered, but ignored. But here, at the heart of the Mughal court, they were gospel. And it wasn't just Wednesdays. Other taboos included no mustache trimming during eclipses. The darkness confuses the curl. Avoid new oils during monsoons. Humidity, plus unfamiliar scents, just chaos. Do not apply wax within earshot of a mourning dove. No one knows why, but one poet blamed his failed romance on this exact transgression. You sit by the registry desk, quietly sipping a cup of weak tea offered by a sympathetic clerk. Across the room, a nobleman stomps in, flustered, his mustache clearly in distress. I need a right curl reset, urgently. The head barber raises a hand. It is Wednesday. The nobleman blinks. But I have a duel tomorrow. Then, the barber intones, you must sleep with rice flour on your lip and pray to the river star. The nobleman sighs, defeated. He slinks away, combing his mustache downward in mournful resignation. The tea is warm. The room is quiet again. And you begin to realize these taboos aren't just superstition, they're structure. They're the tiny rituals that keep the chaos of court life at bay. Because when you live in a world where your facial hair could earn you elephants or exile, you cling to every rule you can. There's a rhythm to it, a logic that defies logic. But it feels right. A waxmaker once claimed that the finest oils must never be poured while angry. Another insisted that combs should be soaked under the full moon for emotional balance. A fringe sect believed that mustache wax absorbed cosmic tension and should be burned at the year's end in a solemn ritual called the curling fire. That ritual, sadly, was outlawed after someone lit their mustache by accident and dove into a decorative koi pond. But still, these practices endure. Even now, in modern cities once ruled by the Mughals, you'll find elders who still avoid the barber on Wednesdays, who still nod respectfully at jars labeled morning blend or night calm, who speak softly about the one-eyed curl, a style allegedly cursed after being trimmed during an eclipse. Back in the registry room, a clerk is carefully dusting a framed quote on the wall. You walk over to read it. To trim when told not is to cut the line between order and ruin. Wait one day, the face will forgive you. You smile, because here in this empire, everything has a time, and sometimes that time is not Wednesday. It's a new day. Birds are singing, the market hums, and, you'll be relieved to know, it is not Wednesday. Which means all across the Mughal Empire, barbers are trimming, oils are warming, and mustaches are being gently coaxed back into socially acceptable arcs. But today, something else is afoot. You're in an office, a busy one. Scrolls rustle, inkpots bubble. There's a faint scent of dust, sandalwood, and rising panic. Because what you're witnessing is an event of tremendous bureaucratic absurdity. The Great Handlebar Census. Yes, they counted mustaches. No, it didn't go well. You're in the Mughal Bureau of Grooming Records. A long, echoing hall lined with clerks, charts, and a steadily increasing number of complaints. One frazzled man is trying to draw a mustache from memory. Another is weeping softly into a comb. The goal? Create an empire-wide catalog of every notable mustache in service to the court, its style, length, curvature, and official bearer. Historians still debate who ordered this madness. Some point to a vizier with a deeply symmetrical handlebar and a passion for documentation. Others suspect Akbar himself, perhaps frustrated that he couldn't remember which of his 67 military governors wore the imperial crescent versus the falcon's curve. Either way, A royal decree went out. All mustaches shall be recorded. Naturally, chaos followed. You shuffle closer to a scribe. He's sketching furiously, something between an eyebrow and a seahorse. This man, he mutters, said his mustache curls outward like twin lotus leaves at dawn. What does that mean? You peer at the parchment. The drawing looks more like panicked spaghetti. Another clerk arrives, dropping a scroll with a sigh. Province of Multan. 33 nobles claim their mustaches are divine. 2 say they are beyond geometry. 1 submitted a poem instead of a form. That man, you later learn, was promoted. The idea behind the census was noble, at least in theory. A centralized record would help settle inheritance disputes, prove identity, and establish rank. Since mustaches often functioned as de facto ID cards, some argued that having them on file was as critical as sealing a royal decree. But as it turns out, mustaches are elusive. They change with the weather, the mood, the moon phase. A man might file a straight taper one day, and the next appear with the double fork, claiming spiritual awakening. Some claimed dual identities. Morning mustache versus evening mustache. One official from Lahore claimed his mustache changed color based on his mood. 3 artists were dispatched to confirm. All returned confused. One just drew a cloud and cried. And of course, there was tampering. You overhear whispers of a man who bribed a census agent to embellish his sketch with extra curl depth. Another faked a style by affixing horsehair extensions. He was caught when one side neighed during a ceremony. You notice a wanted poster on the wall. It shows a criminal whose mustache is drawn in such wild abstraction it might also be a constellation or a startled bat. The caption reads, "Suspect remains at large." Maybe curling counterclockwise. You stifle a giggle. The most controversial part of the whole endeavor was the ranking system. Each mustache was graded on symmetry length, intent metaphor. Yes, metaphor. Applicants were required to describe the essence of their style. A mustache wasn't just a shape, it was a statement. One noble wrote, "Mine is the curve of patience, the arc of unseen ambition." Another wrote, "Left side, betrayal. Right side, revenge." That entry was flagged for emotional volatility. Fringe scholars later argued that this census marked the moment when Mughal grooming jumped from high fashion to full philosophy. The empire wasn't just documenting hair, it was capturing identity, performance, even myth. One poet, deeply frustrated by being labeled mildly asymmetrical, protested by refusing to groom entirely. His resulting style, wild, wind-tossed, waxless, sparked a small counter-movement. The untamed school. They met in bathhouses, lit cloves, whispered angrily about the tyranny of straight lines. You wander past shelves of ink-smeared mustache records. Some are actual sketches. Others are little wax casts pressed onto parchment. A few are somehow songs. A clerk nods toward a drawer labeled "Confusing entries. Reassess in winter." You open it. Inside are scrolls with notes like, "His mustache is shy." Possibly not a mustache, pending confirmation. Claims the wind grooms him. And one simply reads, "The barber cried." Eventually, the census was abandoned. The official reason? Resource misallocation. The real reason? Too many scrolls. Not enough understanding. But remnants of the census lived on. In dusty libraries. In whispered barbershop legends. In the dreams of frustrated archivists who wake sweating, crying out, "It was an inverted curl, not a spiral." You step outside into the light again. You tilt your head. Your reflection glints in a passing brass plate. And you wonder, if your mustache were counted, what would it say? Not in length, not in millimeters, but in metaphor. Maybe. Still growing. Maybe. Uncertain, but committed. Maybe. Wind-blown, but stubborn. You smile, and keep walking. The sun is lower now, golden on the rooftops, softening everything. Even the imperial arches look like they're about to take a nap. You wander into a quiet courtyard where a heated debate is unfolding. No shouting, just intense glares, nervous teacup sips, and long pauses filled with passive-aggressive eyebrow raises. You've walked straight into one of the most delicate schisms in Mughal mustache culture. The beard versus mustache factions. Oh yes, this was real. You sit down next to a student with ink-stained fingers. He leans toward you, whispering as if discussing a state secret. It began with philosophy, he says. Then it turned personal. Across from you are two clusters of men. On the left, the mustachists, every upper lip a masterpiece, curled, waxed, edged. Their chins, smooth as silk. On the right, the beardists, proud jawlines swathed in thick, majestic beards, mustaches present, but clearly playing second fiddle. There's tension. A small sign near the fountain reads, "Debate session. Topic, which is closer to the divine form?" You brace yourself. The lead mustachist, a court poet named Bahram, rises, his handlebar mustache gleaming like sunlit sabers. The mustache, he declares, is restraint, precision. A man who curates only what is needed, speaks through discipline. Polite applause. Then, the beardist, an older philosopher named Imam Sadru, stands, stroking his beard like it's a sacred manuscript. "And yet," he replies smoothly, "a beard is fullness, wisdom, the embrace of what nature intended. The mustache is an accent, the beard is the sentence." Oh, several scribes nod thoughtfully. One man fans himself with a sandalwood menu. You've stumbled into an ancient cultural divide. Historians still argue whether this split originated from religious differences, regional grooming preferences, or just a series of deeply insecure poets trying to one-up each other. In many parts of the empire, the beard was a sign of maturity, piety, and dignity. Sufi mystics wore them proudly. So did judges, scholars, and the occasional philosopher who claimed his beard whispered secrets to him while he slept. But the mustache crowd, they leaned toward aesthetics, court fashion, romantic appeal. Their motto, allegedly, was, "Above the lip lies the soul." Their grooming was intricate, ceremonial, and often smelled faintly of citrus and ambition. The two sides coexisted, mostly. But there were flare-ups. One famous court anecdote recalls the jam pot incident, when a beardist accused a mustachist of using jam to fake gloss. In retaliation, the mustachist claimed the beardist was hiding crumbs from last week's festival in his facial foliage. A duel almost broke out. Instead, they were forced to eat soup together, without wiping. Another time, a neutral party, a young noble with both a generous beard and a curled mustache, tried to mediate. He was booed, labeled a fence-sitter, and made to read romantic poetry until he cried. In rare moments, though, there was crossover. You hear whispered tales of hybrid stylists, rogue barbers who dared to shape both beard and mustache with equal artistry. One such figure, Master Anwar, was said to craft transitions so smooth that passing pigeons paused to admire the fade. He was loved, feared, eventually exiled for follicular arrogance. Back in the courtyard, the debate rages on. Bahram of the Mustachists reads a verse. A single line above the lip holds back the flood below the chin. Sadru responds with, "A field uncut tells fuller truth than gardens trimmed by pride." You sip tea that someone placed near you without asking. It tastes like cloves and scholarly tension. You realize this debate has lasted years. Each side holds annual festivals. The mustachists host oil blessing ceremonies. The beardists celebrate by tying their beards into braids and composing slow, sad songs about rain and fatherhood. One year, a compromise was suggested. The beard ache, a blended style where the mustache flared outward into the beard like rivers into the sea. It was not well received. One man fainted. You quietly excuse yourself as the session winds down. Both factions bow stiffly, and a few even nod in respect, though not to each other. You walk away reflecting on the strange, delicate politics of hair. In a world where empires rise and fall, where armies cross deserts and philosophers challenge the stars, somehow, grown men still gather to argue about which patch of hair deserves more reverence. And honestly, you kind of love it. Because these arguments, however absurd, are just another way humans try to define themselves. Through style, through statements, through the stubborn curl of identity. Whether it's beard, mustache, or something in between, it always grows from the same place. After all the debates and duels, you're craving something lighter, something simple. Something that doesn't involve oil blends named after moon phases or men quoting poems at each other in falsetto rage. Naturally, you end up in the middle of a scandal involving love letters written in mustache hair. You didn't plan this. No one plans this. It starts innocently enough. You're in the royal archives, leafing through a folio titled Courtly Correspondence, Volume 2, Extremely Private, Please Don't Touch. When a single hair, long, curved, glossy, falls from between the pages. You blink. Then, curiously, you discover what appears to be a love note. Not written on parchment, but made of parchment, and stitched together with facial hair. Mustache strands, in a delicate looping script. The archivist catches your eye and sighs. Oh, not again. Welcome to one of the strangest Mughal fads to ever curl its way through the nobility. In the late 16th century, a peculiar trend swept the court. Lovers, particularly among the elite, began sending each other personal notes that weren't just romantic, but physically intimate. Not perfume, not kisses. No. They sent clippings of their mustaches. Historians still argue whether this began as a joke, a dare, or a tragic misunderstanding involving a poet, a pigeon, and a poorly labeled envelope. Regardless, it became a full-blown fashion for a brief, wonderfully disturbing period. The idea? You'd send a message with a strand of your own facial hair attached, or if you were especially devoted, you'd form actual letters with trimmed strands. Hair calligraphy. It was seen as the ultimate symbol of vulnerability, trust, and follicular devotion. One surviving example reads, "Even as my curl grows wild with longing, may yours rest gently upon my memory." Signed, with a kiss and 2 entwined whiskers. You shudder. And yet, some recipients were touched, literally and emotionally. These gifts were cherished, pressed between pages, even worn in lockets. A particularly dramatic noblewoman once braided 3 such offerings into a necklace and wore them to a diplomatic banquet. She fainted during dessert. No connection to the necklace was confirmed. Not all went well, of course. A jealous courtier once intercepted a love letter hairpiece and swapped it with horsehair. The recipient, upon noticing the coarse emotional texture, immediately declared heartbreak and became a nun. Another letter caused political confusion when a general's wife received a trimmed mustache tip and assumed it was code for retreat. That particular border standoff lasted 6 weeks and ended with a lot of apologizing. You read further and find that there were even hair authenticity experts. Yes, Men whose job it was to verify the origin of love strands. They examined thickness, curl pattern, and oil residue. One document states, "This sample bears the clove of Prince Moin and the dryness of guilt. Verified." A fringe theory claims Akbar himself received such a token, an anonymous curl sealed in rose wax. He allegedly kept it in a jeweled box labeled "Unclaimed Affections." The box was stolen years later. Its contents lost. You wander the archive more deeply, and in one quiet alcove you find a display case. The hair letters of Lady Anjuman. Inside are 5 tiny scrolls, 4 made of parchment. The 5th, a delicate weave of what appears to be red-dyed facial hair, spelling the words, "Forgive me." According to the plaque, she was a court poet known for her scandalous verse and scandalier love life. Her lovers, it is said, were ranked not by wealth or status, but by the quality of their mustaches. She once dismissed a duke because his curl lacked narrative arc. Her final lover, a gardener, his mustache was unruly, but smelled of truth. Their correspondence, made entirely of waxed strands and bitter poems, ended only when he trimmed it all off in grief and sent her the trimmings in a box shaped like a teardrop. She responded by writing, "Goodbye," in her own hair. The box is in the display case. You stand very still. The archivist wanders back over. "They were dramatic," he says softly, "but sincere." You leave the archive quietly, the scent of aged parchment still clinging to your sleeves. Outside, the sun is dipping low. You pass a young couple near the fountain. They sit in silence. She gently runs her finger along the curve of his mustache. He doesn't speak. He just smiles. And you think, maybe it's not so strange. In a world where so much was forbidden, performed, and powdered with protocol, maybe a single curl, trimmed with care and sent across the miles, meant something. Maybe it still does. Evening has fully settled now. The palace glows with quiet lantern light, the scent of jasmine rising like a polite ghost. Most of the courtiers are preparing for feasts, poetry readings, or long baths scented with questionable herbs. You, however, have found your way into a small, heavily guarded room behind a tapestry that looks entirely unremarkable unless you know what you're looking for. You're in the Emperor's disguise kit room. It's exactly as strange as it sounds. The man beside you, small, wiry, with a streak of silver in his beard and eyes that haven't blinked in a while, leans in and whispers, "Welcome to the archive of false faces." The door clicks shut behind you. You now stand in a space filled wall to wall with the most bizarre and oddly inspiring collection you've seen all day. Shelves upon shelves of fake facial hair, mustaches, beards, sideburns, eyebrows, all carefully tagged, boxed, and in most cases, labeled with unnervingly specific names. You read a few. Grieving merchant, northern provinces. Retired goat herder, slightly suspicious. Philosopher in exile, but hopes to return. Each mustache is paired with a small scroll describing its intended use, alignment curve, emotional tone, and scent profile. You are somehow not surprised. Because what few people outside the Mughal court know is that Emperor Akbar, ruler of an empire, poet, warrior, philosopher king, had a thing for disguises. Not just for drama, for espionage. Historians still argue how often he actually used them. Some insist it was merely symbolic, masks to represent empathy with his people. Others claim he regularly wandered the streets in costume, observing his subjects firsthand. At least 36 reports describe him sneaking into markets, tea stalls, or rural gatherings in full disguise. And the disguises always included mustaches. Why? Because if your lip was naked, you'd be nobody. but with the right mustache, you could be anybody. You wander the room slowly. Some false mustaches are thin and elegant, dusted with rose oil. Others are bristly, unruly, designed to be seen as rural but respected. One is dyed green. The note attached reads, "For festivals or confusion tactics." You lift one box labeled, "The Scribe Who Knows Too Much." Inside, a thin black line with delicate curls at both ends and a small inkwell stain on the tip, just for realism. Another reads, "Widower who plays the flute, optional teardrop." There are more elaborate disguises too, whole beard sets, complete with adhesive paste made from fig sap and sorrow. Apparently the Emperor once wore one so convincingly that his own general offered him a discount on pairs. The custodian of the room, Master Nafis, begins to explain the system. You see, the Empire is vast, and to rule well, one must see it, not as an emperor, but as a farmer, a soldier, a taxman with back pain. You nod, not entirely sure if you're being philosophized at or just slowly inducted into a grooming cult. Master Nafis continues. The Emperor's favorite disguise was the old storyteller. Large bushy mustache, white tips, slight curry scent, and a limp, real or performed, depending on the terrain. He pauses. Akbar used it to ask dangerous questions about taxes, about justice, about love. There's a moment of reverence. Then he points to a display case. Inside, the Emperor's personal emergency disguise pouch. It contains 2 pre-curled mustaches, a wax comb, charcoal for brow adjustments, a fragment of simple cloth, and a note that reads, "If I cannot rule in silence, I must observe in disguise." You are absolutely not supposed to be seeing this. And yet here you are, breathing the same air as the tools of Imperial subterfuge. There's even a decoy scroll on a nearby table, written in reverse. When held to a mirror, it reads, "If I look like a butcher, believe me, but ask me no questions until my left curl twitches." You sit, stunned. In a world obsessed with presentation, where identity is as much about what sits beneath your nose as what lies in your heart, Akbar had weaponized the mustache, not just as status, but as a mask, a movable truth, a social scalpel. You're told of one final tale. A rebellion was brewing in a distant province. Instead of sending an army, Akbar rode in secret, disguised as a grain merchant with a crooked gray mustache. He spent 3 days in the bazaar, asking questions. He listened. He laughed. He drank bitter tea with the townspeople. Then he left. The next day, the rebellion dissolved. No bloodshed, only whispers, and one oddly perfect mustache hair left behind in a bowl of lentils. You stand in silence a moment longer, absorbing the gravity of it all. Not all kings wear crowns. Some wear sideburns that smell like turmeric and cunning. You exit the room slowly, and you realize maybe the truest mustache isn't the one on your face. It's the one you choose to wear when no one knows who you are. You leave the disguise room feeling conflicted. Inspired, sure, but also slightly suspicious of every gardener, fruit seller, and mop-wielding custodian you pass on the way out. Could that old man be Akbar in disguise? Is that rice merchant over there adjusting his mustache a bit too carefully? Your paranoia is mildly justified. But now, you've stepped into the bustle of the evening marketplace, and the mood has shifted from royal games to something far more dangerous. Public shame for patchiness. Yes, this empire, for all its wealth and philosophy, has no chill when it comes to uneven facial hair. You're standing near a lamp-lit bazaar, where the crowd moves in soft waves. Traders, musicians, lovers with their hands shyly intertwined. And in the center, a circle of spectators gathered around what looks suspiciously like a performance. You edge closer. In the middle, a young man stands nervously. His mustache, what little of it there is, clings to his lip like a frightened caterpillar. It's clearly trying, but it's not ready. And circling him, with theatrical flair and a voice like a smooth dagger, is the town's resident poetic ridiculist. That's a real job. These men, yes, they were always men, were hired by market guilds or even municipalities to mock, rhyme, and gently shame those whose mustaches failed to meet civic standards. Think of them as government-sanctioned roast comedians with excellent posture. This one wears a turban with a quill tucked in the side and speaks in perfect couplets. A curl that leans, a lip that cries, "Oh barber, why ignore these sighs? Your hair retreats like troops in war. Have you no oil, no comb, no lore?" The crowd giggles. The young man blushes and tries to hide behind his shawl. The ridiculist bows slightly and gives him a wooden token. Good effort. Try again. He's let off easy. You later learn that the real punishment isn't the poetry, it's social invisibility. A patchy mustache might mean no seat at the communal tea bench, no invitations to poetry readings, and worst of all, no marriage proposals. Historians still argue whether this was systemic cruelty or just an unfortunate byproduct of Mughal aesthetic obsession. A few fringe theorists believe it was all invented by barbers to drum up business. There were, however, exceptions. A man who could recite perfect verses while stroking a weak mustache might be forgiven, especially if the verses were funny, or heart-wrenching, or used the phrase, "like a wilted mango in monsoon," at least twice. In some towns, patchy festivals were even held, nights where young men would display their struggling facial growths like underfed bonsai trees, and elders would vote on most promising shadow, best single strand, and heroic persistence. You pass a poster advertising one such festival. The third annual Parade of Patience. Tonight, bring your own oil. Further down the lane, you see a barber shop offering free consultations. A sign in the window reads, "Patchy, it's not your fault. It's the moon. Ask about our goat butter blend." You step inside. The barber is kind. Old. He gestures for you to sit, then lifts your chin gently. "You're worried about gaps," he says. Not a question. You nod. He reaches for a jar of soft glowing cream. This is Milton's Mercy, made from poppy seed, almond, and crushed silver leaf. Useless, but very comforting. You grin. He grins back. "Sometimes," he says, "it's not about the growth, it's about the belief." You look at your reflection. It's still patchy. But you see it differently now. Maybe because you've seen what a mustache means here. The pressure, the pride, the poetry. You realize this empire doesn't mock weakness. It ritualizes it, folds it into culture, teases it like a sibling. And in doing so, it makes room for even the sparsest, slowest growing whiskers. Back outside, the young man from earlier is now holding hands with someone. They're laughing. A small curl is visible on his upper lip, like a promise. As you walk away, a ridiculist calls out to you. "O traveler, with lips so shy, shall we meet again, by and by?" You tip your head, curl one corner of your mouth, and reply, "Only when the moon forgives my follicles." The crowd cheers. You don't know what just happened, but it feels triumphant. Night falls gently on the Empire. The stars scatter across the sky like spilled cardamom, and the scent of smoke and spice drifts from rooftops and open kitchens. You follow the sound of rhythmic chanting, the clang of steel against steel, and, strangely, a faint whir that turns out to be a waxer's spinning cloth wheel. You've arrived at a military encampment just outside the city. Tents are lined in perfect rows, horses snort in the distance, and seated around fires are men with calloused hands, battle-scarred faces, and exquisitely maintained mustaches. Welcome to the front lines of whiskers on the battlefield. Yes, even here, amid armor, grit, and the ever-present risk of cannonball-related career changes, the mustache reigns supreme. You're greeted by a soldier polishing his scimitar with one hand and twisting his upper lip with the other. If it's not curled, it's not ready, he mutters. You're not sure if he means the blade or the hair. The Mughal military, as you quickly discover, had its own facial code of conduct. Mustache styles were more than decorative. They were tactical identifiers. And yes, even among warriors, grooming mattered. Historians still argue whether it was Akbar or one of his generals who first mandated facial hair regulations in the ranks. But once the idea took hold, it spread like sandalwood oil on a hot day. Each military division adopted a specific mustache shape. It helped with command visibility, unit cohesion, and let's be honest, morale. You observe the archers, wide horizontal spreads like the arms of a drawn bow. The cavalry, upward flares with stiff wax so they could be seen even from horseback. The engineers, narrow, angled tips. To mimic bridges, one says, though you suspect he's being poetic. The elephant corps, thick, downward curving ends, said to resemble tusks. Intimidating in silhouette, even more so when charging. And then, the scouts, your personal favorite. Their mustaches are almost invisible. Light, trimmed short, and dusted with earth-colored powder so as not to reflect moonlight. Stealth, their commander explains. Shine gives you away. One scout boasts that he once infiltrated a rebel camp and wasn't detected because his mustache looked like a shadow trying to apologize. You sit by a fire with a group of veteran soldiers. They speak with pride and a faint air of theatricality about the curl before combat. It's a pre-battle ritual. Wax is warmed, combs are passed. A silent circle forms. Each man styles the other's mustache, not because they need help, but because it creates trust. Unity, a shared rhythm before the storm. One man leans close and whispers, "You only twist the left curl if you believe you'll return." Chilling and strangely beautiful. You're handed a scroll by a passing officer. It reads, Code of the Battle Whisker. Let no tip go limp before the enemy. Groom in silence, wax in dignity. A man who sweats through his curl shall not be mocked, but respected. If captured, offer your mustache as a token of honor, but only if it is symmetrical. There's even a legendary tale of a general who, upon losing his mustache in battle, yes, physically torn off, refused to speak until it grew back. His soldiers followed suit. An entire regiment went silent for 6 weeks. They still won the campaign. They just mimed everything. A fringe theory claims that mustaches affected strategy. One source describes a commander who adjusted the angle of his right tip before a siege, and his troops interpreted it as a signal to flank. They did. It worked. He never told them otherwise. Another account, less credible but more delightful, suggests that Akbar once challenged a Rajput king to a mustache-staring contest before a duel. The duel was cancelled. The two rulers simply nodded, mustaches twitching, and signed a peace treaty instead. You're offered a small jar of battle balm. It smells of smoke, cedar, and something faintly metallic. A soldier explains. Keeps the curl in place, even in cannon wind. You nod solemnly and pretend you understand what cannon wind feels like. One older warrior pulls you aside. Son, he says, a sword cuts, a mustache warns. When they see the curve, they know. This man believes in his own survival. He pauses. Even if he's wrong. You fall asleep that night in a borrowed tent, the stars visible through the open flap. And as you close your eyes, you think, No empire ever survives on swords alone. Sometimes it's the way a man shapes his fear into a perfect curl. Sometimes it's the symmetry he insists on when everything else is chaos. You wake to birdsong, distant drumming, and the quiet pride of a soldier meticulously waxing his mustache using his own reflection in a polished shield. The sun glints off the curl. It is perfect, regal, possibly divine. But today, you're headed somewhere very different. Quieter, less battlefield, more brushstroke. Because now, you're entering the serene, sun-dappled world of Mughal portraiture, where ink and paint could immortalize an empire, but not without some creative embellishments. Today's topic? Painted portraits, exaggerated ends. You find yourself in the atelier of a royal miniature painter. He's hunched over a piece of parchment, tongue slightly out, brush dancing like it's whispering secrets. From a distance, the image looks breathtaking. A nobleman, mid-contemplation, clad in robes of deep indigo and gold filigree. And then you see it. The mustache. It's enormous. Unrealistically so. It extends at least an inch past his cheekbones in twin lightning bolt curls that defy gravity, physics, and perhaps decency. You blink. Is that accurate? The painter doesn't look up. Of course not, but he paid well. You've just stumbled upon one of the worst-kept secrets of Mughal high society. Mustache inflation in portraiture. Historians still argue whether this practice began as a flattering gesture or an outright power move. But what's clear is that for centuries, Mughal artists routinely enhanced, extended, and glorified the mustaches of their clients, especially in court-sponsored miniatures. There were rules, of course. A slight embellishment, acceptable. An aspirational arc that implied social ambition, encouraged. A mustache longer than your sword. Unsubtle, but occasionally tolerated. The artist beside you shows off a portfolio. One portrait features a scribe whose actual mustache, according to the artist, barely cast a shadow. In the painting, it's a majestic wave curling up toward his temple, like a gilded apostrophe of success. You ask why. The painter shrugs. He wanted to look more influential. Another image shows a young prince with a pencil-thin line in real life, but a gloriously shaded, thick mustache on paper. He was 12, the artist murmurs. We were instructed to predict the future. One court record tells of a nobleman so thrilled with his portrait's mustache enhancements that he trained his actual facial hair to match the painting. It took 3 years, 8 barbers, and a small scaffolding system. But he did it. A rival, bitter about the portrait's success, reportedly responded by commissioning a fresco of himself, battling a tiger, using only his mustache. You wander into a storage gallery. Inside, a collection of rejected mustache portraits, artworks returned or banned for crossing some invisible line of facial exaggeration. One is labeled, too sharp, looked like swords. Another, unrealistic upward curl, injury risk. One, alarmingly, appears to depict a man whose mustache encircles his entire head like a halo. The caption reads simply, "This man does not exist." There was even a famous scandal, known as the lip line controversy, where a painter added a secret second mustache to a courtier's portrait as revenge for late payment. It was hidden in the folds of his turban. The court only noticed when a visitor asked, "Why does he have eyebrows down there?" The painter was exiled, briefly, then reinstated when the emperor admitted it was technically very well done. But not all artistic license was mischievous. Some portraits told quiet truths. A general, shown with a mustache slightly off-center, to reflect his inner doubt. A scholar, painted with only half a curl. He was known to quote half-finished poems. One artist shows you a small painting of a woman in the harem. She holds a painted fan. On the back, a tiny mustache drawn in delicate strokes. She missed someone, the artist says simply. You realize that these portraits weren't just about looking good. They were a kind of visual poetry, a place where truth and flattery blurred, and the mustache was not just a detail, but a character. Because a man's face in this world was his resume, his mustache, his thesis. You step back into the sunlight, blinking at the real world again. People's facial hair suddenly seems smaller, more modest, more bound by gravity. But you can't unsee it now. Every face is a potential miniature. Every mustache, a symbol, a possibility. A quiet promise that maybe, just maybe, you were larger than you appeared. Even if only on parchment. You leave the portrait hall with your thoughts a little twisted, like the exaggerated curls of the nobleman who never actually existed, yet somehow haunts you with his smug, papery elegance. But as your sandals flap along the warm flagstones, something else calls to you. A scent, a sound, a whimper. You follow it into a narrow alley behind the palace kitchens, where steam hisses from open vents, and someone nearby lets out a very quiet scream. You've just stumbled into a waxing session. But not just any waxing session. This is the ancient art of Mughal depilation, a practice so sacred, painful, and steeped in denial that its practitioners speak only in metaphors and low groans. Welcome to How to Wax Without Screaming. You pause at the threshold of a low-lit room where three noblemen are seated in a circle, upper lips trembling, while two barbers, expressionless, steady-handed, possibly monks in disguise, apply warm, viscous wax in small, deliberate swipes. The room smells like honey, turmeric, rose oil, and impending regret. You're waved in by a third man holding a tray of cooling cloths and encouraging dates. First time, he asks. You nod. Say nothing, he whispers. Breathe through the pain. A nearby scroll reads, In silence, the soul prepares. In stillness, the curl survives. It is unsettlingly poetic. You take a seat. Across from you, one of the noblemen appears to be holding his breath in increments, as if sneaking past pain like a sleeping beast. The barber holds up a wooden spatula. It gleams with molten wax. Ready? You shake your head. He begins anyway. The wax is applied, warm, heavy, with the gentle finality of a closing door. It smells faintly of saffron and fatalism. And then, ripe. The pain is brief, sharp, and oddly philosophical, like someone asked you a difficult riddle, but with force. You blink. The room wobbles slightly. A nearby man murmurs, I saw my ancestors. Waxing, it turns out, was serious business in the Mughal world, especially for the mustache elite. A curl that wobbled, flaked, or sprouted rebel hairs was a public failure. And so, men submitted to regular sessions of precise and sometimes terrifying facial control. Historians still argue whether this was inspired by Persian grooming techniques, Ayurvedic rituals, or simply the imperial need to control everything, down to the follicle. There are texts, some scholarly, some clearly written under duress, that describe waxing as a sacred trial. One poet wrote, In the tear, I find clarity. In the sting, I remember who I am. Another wrote, If a man cannot suffer for symmetry, he deserves only the breeze, not the curl. There were different wax blends, each for a specific temperament. Tulsi and sugar for gentle souls. Charcoal and salt for warriors and sadists. Pearl dust and rose for men trying to impress poets. You're handed a scroll by the cooling cloth attendant. It's titled, Waxing Without Weeping, a Guide for Stiff Lips. The first line reads, Step 1. Lie to yourself. It's not going to hurt. It does. But you begin to understand why they do it. It's not just about hair removal. It's ritual self-discipline. It's emotional editing. You are literally tearing away imperfection, one follicle at a time. The barbers are artists, philosophers, maybe secretly therapists. They speak little, but their tools are labeled mercy, balance, regret. You ask if anyone has ever fled mid-session. A nod. One man tried to bribe the wax. Didn't work. Another story floats around the room of a visiting noble who claimed pain immunity. "I feel only glory," he said, right before fainting into a bowl of pickled limes. No one blamed him. He was remembered fondly. You finish your session with a small bowl of cooling fig milk pressed to your upper lip, and the vague sensation that your mustache has ascended to a higher plane. The barber pats your shoulder. "Good symmetry," he says. You don't cry. Much. As you leave, you see a small plaque above the door. To suffer for beauty is human. To wax for balance is divine. You walk into the night a little smoother, a little wiser, and just slightly afraid of any surface warmer than room temperature. Because now, you know the truth. The Mughal mustache didn't just grow. It endured. It was sculpted, polished, torn from the fires of self-delusion and fused into shape with honey, hope, and a hint of madness. And beneath every great curl, pain, precision, and a man whispering softly to himself, "I do this for balance." You emerge from the waxing chamber reborn, slightly redder, marginally smoother, and possessed of a newfound respect for anyone who's ever applied hot sap to their face with intention. The stars are bright now, clear and sharp above the city. The streets are quiet, the breeze gentle, and the Empire feels tender for once. But then you hear a soft, solemn bell, and someone mutters, "A whisker has fallen." You turn. A small crowd is gathering in the courtyard of the Scholars' Quarter. Lanterns flicker. There's a long table covered in rose petals. A man in mourning robes kneels at the head of it, holding a tiny clay urn. You have arrived, friend, at something both ridiculous and deeply moving. A Mughal funeral for a mustache. Yes, this happened. No, not often. But when it did, oh, it was an event. Tonight's ceremony is for a man named Karim, a minor poet of middling fame, known mostly for his lyrical odes to mango pickles and one wildly popular couplet comparing monsoon clouds to a disappointed librarian's sigh. Karim, it turns out, has not died. His mustache has. More precisely, after a tragic barbering accident involving an unexpected sneeze, a rogue goat, and a case of mistaken identity, both ends of Karim's once celebrated mustache were lopped off. And he has chosen to grieve. Formally. The crowd is respectful. The mustache, now resting in a silk-lined box shaped like a mango, lies at the center of the table. Incense burns. Someone plays a soft dirge on the sitar. The officiant stands and begins to speak. Here rests the curl that carried metaphors, that dipped into soup, but never into shame, that brushed cheeks without consent, yet always in rhythm. You try not to weep. Beside you, a man leans over and whispers, "This is the third mustache funeral this month. It's been a rough season." You nod, solemnly. Historians still argue whether these ceremonies were common or merely eccentric. Records suggest that noblemen and poets sometimes held farewell rituals for facial hair lost in accidents, duels, or sudden moments of self-doubt. There is even one documented instance of a posthumous mustache inheritance. A scholar's final will requested that his mustache be preserved, dried, and passed to his grandson, who promptly had it mounted on a fan and used it in court debates as an ancestral wind of wisdom. Back at the funeral, the poet Karim now rises. He holds up a scroll. "This," he says, "is the last poem my mustache ever heard." He clears his throat. "O curl, once sharp as autumn's edge, now softer than a scholar's pledge. May wines above the market stall remember you, both left and all." Applause, soft and deeply sincere. Then, in a final act of release, Kareem opens the silk box and gently tips the two mustache ends into the clay urn. A priest seals it with wax and places it into a small niche in the garden wall, among dozens of other urns. Each labeled, each remembered. You walk along the wall, reading names, the whisper of Jalil, lost to candlelight and poor judgment. The miner left of Bashir, trimmed too far during a storm. Hassan's ark, removed voluntarily in a crisis of faith. There's even a tiny shrine to the mustache of no one, a tribute to all the curls never grown, never loved, never shaped into expression. A candle burns there, low and eternal. As the crowd disperses, a drunk poet lingers nearby. He lifts his cup, toasts the stars, and mutters, "We're all just follicles waiting for wax." You nod, because it's oddly true. You sit beside the pond near the garden wall, watching koi fish drift like silent monks. You think of all the mustaches that have graced this empire, not just the legendary ones or the imperial ones, but the quiet ones, the modest wisps, the soft curls trimmed too early, the tips that never quite curled but tried anyway. Because in this world, to groom was to dream. And sometimes, dreams end. But tonight, they are remembered, with incense, with verse, with a box shaped like fruit, and with the quiet, unspoken knowledge that tomorrow, the hair may grow again. The city lies still now. The laughter has faded, the bells are quiet, and even the fountains whisper instead of sing. You find yourself alone, truly alone, wandering through the marble corridors of a sleeping palace, the moonlight slick across the tiles like poured milk. Your footsteps echo as you enter one last chamber. A gallery, or perhaps a shrine. The walls are covered in portraits, relics, wax molds, and curling iron tools. Some gleam, some are cracked with time. In the center of the room stands a single mirrored pillar, reflecting nothing but soft lamplight and you. You've arrived at the heart of it all, the legacy of the Lip lineage. Because despite all the laughter, the wax, the duels, and the absolutely unnecessary goat incidents, the Mughal obsession with mustaches wasn't just about fashion. It was about legacy. It was about leaving a mark. One careful, fragrant, perfectly balanced strand at a time. On one wall, a painted timeline. Babur's stubble. Rugged, wind-cut, survival mode. Humayun's hesitant line, promising, unfinished. Akbar's perfect curve, the age of order. Jahangir's indulgent plume, like a painter fell in love with his own reflection. Shah Jahan's dual towers, imperial, architectural, possibly a cry for help. Aurangzeb's severe angles, all structure, no softness. Historians still argue what these mustaches really meant, politically, religiously, psychologically. Were they statements of individuality, symbols of order, acts of silent rebellion? Maybe yes, maybe all. A display case beneath the timeline contains ancient tools, scissors engraved with poetry, combs carved from sandalwood, tiny wax pots once used in preparation for diplomatic summits, and in the center, under glass, a dried lock, curved gently to the left. Label, origin unknown, possibly royal, preserved by scent. You breathe it in. Clove, dust, memory. You realize now the Empire was built not only on maps and taxes, but on identity, public and private, polished and messy, real and aspirational. The mustache became the bridge between those realms. A place where a man declared, in silence, "Here is who I am, and here is who I wish to be." A nearby scroll is mounted to the wall, a single line. Empires fall, hair returns. And maybe that's the truth of it. Maybe the Mughal mustache wasn't about grooming at all. Maybe it was about continuity. A ritual of control in a world of uncertainty. A daily act of creation. A soft, waxed defiance against time. You touch your upper lip now, reflexively, and you smile. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. And because now, you understand. You step outside one last time. The moon is high. The wind stirs your collar. And somewhere, faintly, you imagine the mustaches of history curling slightly in approval. The palace grows dim behind you. Even the torches seem to sigh, their flames tired from all that glorious burning. You walk slowly now, your limbs heavy, your breath long, your thoughts as soft and still as jasmine petals on stone. Each step takes you further from the clamor of history, further from the poets, the rebels, the waxers, further from the courts and curlers and ceremonial goat-themed barbershop duels. Just the stars above. The scent of sandalwood lingering like an old friend. And the knowledge that somewhere, beneath the silk and steel of an empire long gone, a man once stood very still, just to get the left side to match the right. So rest now. Let your own thoughts uncurl. Let your breath lengthen. Let your jaw slacken, just slightly. You've walked through an entire civilization, one strand at a time. Now nothing remains but a calm, a gentle hum in the dark, and a story told in the quiet curl of sleep.